Olá, agentes MUDA, sejam todos muito bem-vindos, muito bem-vindas a mais esse encontro da primeira etapa de nivelamento e preparo do nosso programa. O programa Agente MUDA se trata de construir uma comunidade de práticas de lideranças sistêmicas que mudam as regras do jogo, para a gente construir um sistema econômico que seja equitativo e regenerativo. Nessa primeira etapa, nós já tivemos algumas conversas. A primeira delas com Daniel Val, um grande especialista, inspirador, que nos ensinou e compartilhou muito sobre economia regenerativa. Depois, nós tivemos uma conversa incrível com Stuart Wallace, que é um grande inspirador, pensador e influenciador da economia de bem-estar. A sua organização, a Wellbeing Economy Alliance, WEALL, está presente em muitos países, influenciando a criação de instrumentos poderosos de políticas públicas para a gente poder pensar uma nova economia do bem-estar, como o Wellbeing Economy, ou Wellbeing Index, ou Índice de Bem-Estar. Hoje, nós vamos ter uma conversa mediada por uma grande liderança aqui no Brasil. A Célia Cruz é uma das principais personalidades do ecossistema de empreendedorismo social, de inovação social, de investimentos em negócios de impacto. À frente do ICE, a Célia tem contribuído há mais de uma década para o fortalecimento desse ecossistema de investimentos em negócios de impacto. E ela conversará com uma outra personalidade que é um grande inspirador global desse tema. Sir Ronald Cohen foi um dos principais personagens na construção da indústria de venture capital no Reino Unido. Fundou diversas organizações como Social Finance, influenciou junto com o governo britânico a criação do Big Society Capital, que é uma iniciativa que fomenta a construção do ecossistema no Reino Unido. Criou instrumentos fundamentais como o Social Impact Bonds e mostrou que é possível mobilizar capital público e privado para impacto positivo. Sir Ronald Cohen também tem uma participação especial no movimento global de empresas B. Fundou uma das primeiras empresas B no Reino Unido, a Bridge Ventures. Também foi o financiador da construção do B-Lab UK e a chegada do movimento de empresas B, ou B Corp, no Reino Unido. Sir Ronald Cohen hoje tem trabalhado de maneira importante na construção de uma visão de um novo paradigma da contabilidade de impacto junto à Universidade de Harvard. Isso será um dos temas da conversa com a Célia Cruz. Enfim, é por isso que nós estamos tendo essa conversa hoje, para a gente poder se inspirar, se conectar, se influenciar, se instrumentalizar de uma poderosa visão de como a economia de impacto pode nos ajudar, seja gestores públicos, seja líderes empresariais, ou inovadores sociais, lideranças da sociedade civil organizada, nós podemos construir novas ferramentas, nos desenvolver para a construção dessa economia de impacto, como vai nos influenciar essa conversa incrível entre Célia e Ronald Cohen. Sejam todos, mais uma vez, muito bem-vindos, desfrutem dessa conversa e nos vemos em breve. Um grande e forte abraço de toda a equipe do Agente MUDA.
Hello, everyone. I'm Célia Cruz. I'm the Executive Director of ICE, a non-profit organization created in 1999 by businessmen and businesswomen, investors, and philanthropists. We are committed to social innovation for social inclusion and poverty reduction in Brazil. And since 2012, we work to foster and strengthen the national impact investment and impact business ecosystem. This movement that we are inspired by Sir Ronald Cohen, so that's really a great pleasure to be here. I'm also passionate about social entrepreneurship, and we have in this room one of the best social entrepreneurs from the world, Sir Ronald Cohen. And I'm a believer in system change through coalitions and partnership. And again, this man in this room is an inspiration about how to create coalitions for systems change. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. And I would like to start by thanking Dynamo for the invitation and congratulating them on the MUDA Agent Initiative, how to support leaders and that change the rules of the game in the world. It's a privilege to address this group, especially with its commitment to systemic leadership. Now, I welcome the chance to have this conversation with the inspiring leader, Sir Ronald Cohen. Let me begin with a short introduction. Sir Ronald Cohen is an Egyptian-born British businessman and political figure. He has been described as a father of the British venture capital and the father of impact investing. For me, he's the conductor of the impact investing orchestra and a visionary of this ecosystem. He's more than a leader, he's an inspiration and a path breaker. Sir Ronald Cohen is a co-founder and chair of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, better known as the GSG, working with leaders from finance, business, and philanthropy from 35 countries. He was one of the first visionaries of the impact investing model, optimizing risk, return, and impact to benefit people and the planet. He's also the founder of the Portland Trust, the co-founder of Bridge Fund Management, Big Society Capital, Impact Weighted Account at Harvard Business School, and of Social Finance, UK, US, and Israel. Sir Ronald Cohen, it's a great pleasure to have this dialogue with you, and please say your welcome words. And then I'll go to our first motion.
Thank you very much, Célia. It's always a pleasure to share the platform with you. We go back many years since our efforts started in Brazil together, and I'm very fond of Brazil, as you know, and I very much look forward to this conversation, so we can get going.
Okay. So in this first blog, Sir Ronald Cohen, and I will call you Ronnie, I would like to explore your systemic approach for major changes. As you know, I have worked for many years with social entrepreneurs all over the world at Ashoka. And like I said, you are one of the best. I love how social entrepreneurs see a problem and at the same time, you see the solution, which usually involves changing rules, organizations, policies, and the hardest part, to change mindsets. Another reference that I would like to mention to this group is the iceberg model for systems thinking. What I like from this model is more than a tool to understand the origin of the problem. The iceberg model for me is a great framework to think about different interventions we must do to create system change. I will refer also to examples of your approach that I know since 2014 to building systemic change using the tools of impact investing. So when I met you, you were creating like the G7 Social Finance Task Force, and we were inspired by how Canada, UK were doing recommendations, and then we created our Brazilian Social Finance Task Force at that point with Brazilian leaders. So I will try to highlight some examples of your engagement in this area, and I hope to do justice to it. So please correct me if I did any mistake here. But for me, when the British government called you on how to use financial tools to contribute to serious problems of poverty, you envision how to mobilize a lot of new private capital in a way that it could create products and services focused on solving these problems, at the same time generating return to the invested capital. That was a big new idea to solve this problem, and you are able to build support for this concept among the members from the G7 and later G20 to implement this vision and recommendations. you saw that you need new structures, new organizations in the UK, which led to the creation of Social Finance UK, Big Society Capital, and many other organizations. For me, I always joke that you were like the Lion Kings looking to the forest and say, it's missing this, and creating these organizations. You also saw the existing financial instruments could be used, the existing financial instruments could be useful as long as they give a return to investors' capital while generating social and environmental impact. And I saw like foundations, high-income families began to invest and making loans, guarantees. So foundations using above the grants, they could use loans, they could use guarantees. And you brought foundations for this new image of impact investing. You brought governments into the game with new mental models like payment for results, and then was the social impact bond. But for me, there is also one thing that I would highlight for this group, and is the last level of the layers of the iceberg, or the deepest one, is for me the hardest one, how to change mental models. And now, after 20 years of your work, I see families changing their mindset, foundations, company, changing the paradigms, and start to migrating their investments to impact investment. You are bringing new capital for social change. And this is really an amazing change. So, Ronnie, based on your experience, when you see an opportunity for transformational change, what are the key steps you use between seeing a problem to build a vision and strategies to make major changes? How you look for structures, organizations? How can you share with this group this kind of model that you use, and with concrete examples that you have?
Thank you, Célia, for a very thoughtful and very important question. And thank you for relating a bit of the journey that we have traveled together over the last 8 years to bring about systemic change. So what my career has shown me is that things seldom happen because of single causation. They happen because of multiple causation. There are many forces at work. And I think what characterizes my approach is to try to understand what is moving the world, and where, to take the title of my first book, where the second bounce of the ball is going to be. We can all anticipate the first bounce of the ball. It's more difficult to anticipate the second bounce of the ball. When we think about impact, we see three major forces at work today, moving the world in a direction that will enable it to meet our great environmental and social challenges. The first, we are all aware of it, I don't think anybody will disagree with it, is a change in values. You're talking about changes in mindset today, in families. They often come from their younger members. The young were the first to understand that the existing system just doesn't deliver the results that we seek. We've been unable over 4 decades to really curb the environmental damage that we're creating. And if we look at the history of the last 4 decades, the gap between rich and poor has got even bigger. The social inequalities are even bigger than they were 4 decades ago. And the reason that we have begun to see change in financial markets is that investors became aware that these changing consumer preferences, where young people don't want to buy the products of a company or work for a company if it's creating harm, we're going to have very significant consequences for the profitability of the companies in which they invest, Célia. And that's what drove environmental, social, and governance investing, ESG, which seeks to provide both profit and impact at the same time. Now, you referred to the G8 task force, which published its report in 2014 when we first got going together. At that time, there was 13 trillion of ESG. Today, it's over 40 trillion. At that time, there was no impact investment where you have the intention of ESG and you are measuring the impact created in a rigorous way. Today, we have 2.4 trillion, not billion, trillion of impact investing. So the first major force today, if we want to understand the world, is this change in values. And 40 trillion is about half of all the money in the hands of professional asset managers. So this is not a flash in the pan. It's a major change in capital flows and in our financial system. The second major force changing our world today, and I very much believe on the whole for the better, is the force of technology. If the microchip powered the tech revolution with the help of entrepreneurship and the creation of a new venture capital industry, today the leaps of technology that we see through artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality are equally momentous. They are equally disruptive of existing business models that the microchip was. And so we find ourselves in a situation where impact and technology are now coming together. And Tesla is probably the first example, Célia, of entrepreneurship that brings impact into the business model and succeeds in shifting the whole industry and in the process creating a $1 trillion company. If Tesla hadn't brought the issue of pollution to the fore, and the use of electric vehicles being preferable to the combustion engine, it wouldn't have found its first customers, it wouldn't have found its first talent, and it wouldn't have found its first investors. And these two forces, values and impact, are converging with a third force, which really is now going to bring the systemic change we've all fought for. And that is the force of transparency on the impacts that companies create. We all see the backlash against ESG because of lack of measurement. Everybody can claim that their investments are creating great good, and there's no evidence for it, no comparability with other companies, no verification of the numbers. We have 40 trillion being invested to achieve impact with no measure of the impact created. But the world's moved on. And in the last 3 years, we have seen a huge acceleration in our journey towards impact transparency. We see the EU already imposing transparency on the environmental impact that investment vehicles create. We see the IFRS, which is responsible for financial reporting throughout the whole world, as you know, establishing an international sustainability standards board to create metrics, standardized metrics, the whole world can use. The US has its separate effort, which I'll refer to, that the whole world can use in measuring impact, so that the measurement of a ton of carbon or the measurement of differences in diversity are measured in the same way across the world. And the interesting thing about the ISSB is that it's not just environmental, it's environmental and social. And then you have the effort of the SEC which is focused on environmental only at this stage, which is put on the table to come into effect in April. The measurement of all the environmental impacts of companies, public and private. There's a year's delay between the two. There's a big fight, I would say, in the United States. There's big pushback by some states and by fossil fuel lobbies, but it's going to go through. It may be changed at the margins, but it's going to go through. And finally, you have an effort which the GSG, of which we're both part, has started at Harvard Business School, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative. And this, Célia, is the most powerful bit of the whole puzzle now, because it values impacts and enables us to measure different impacts together and compare them with the profits of a company. So it enables us to bring all the valuable work that's been done on impact measurement into financial analysis and the valuation of companies. Already we see, and then I'll stop with this, Célia, already we see in the analysis at Harvard Business School that the companies that pollute more are worth less than their competitors that pollute less in many sectors. So the weight of the ESG money has already tilted the scales. And if impact data, which is exploding now, we see ventures all over the place, improving our ability to measure impacts, supply chain impacts, product impacts, employment impacts, operating environmental impacts. This explosion puts pressure on regulators, Célia, as you know, to make sure that every investor receives information on a comparable and verified basis at the same time. So the regulators are going to be pushing transparency, not the governments at the top, on top of them, which have a big political fight on their hands, taking on business lobbies that pollute, but the regulators, whose duty is to maintain the integrity of markets.
Listening to you seems like so easy to do, but I know, like, from coming from this, changing the mindset that you mentioned about the new generations, and I see that this new generation is kind of moving, but I see still that it requires for them also changing their status quo to really creating this new economy, to creating a new society with more equality for everyone. And I also want to mention to everyone this book, Impact, all that you mentioned about changing the rules of measuring impact. There is a chapter that for everyone to read, where you compare and how, and it's transparent, this measurement, how we are going to change the flux of capital globally. And I love your vision on this, because it will really, like you always mention, when you increase risk into this calculation, it changed a lot in the 50s. So now, if we include the measuring impact with transparency, and it's not going to be perfect in the first years, but then we will change how people invest globally and how this capital can move from, let's say, Europe to Brazil, US to Africa, and vice versa. So I really love your vision on that. Seems simple from you, but I want you to share a little bit how you engage different stakeholders to really be committed to this vision. So how your experience when you engage key leaders from the public sector? Is there some kind of recommendations you'd like to share with this group? Or when you go to private sector, or when you talk to civil society, is there some kind of different ways you engage these stakeholders. How can you promote this kind of vision and strategies for them to be committed to this kind of new economic systems that you are envisioning, or this kind of, it's so complex and so, it's such a complex and new systems, but I want to, if you can share how you engage leaders to be involved in this vision, in particular to change the rules. You said it's not about just political, but how to change policies, to change rules. And I want to, if you can share with the group this.
So Celia, as you well know, we started off by pushing the idea that optimizing risk, return, and impact actually delivers better financial results today. And so capital should flow and is flowing to the companies that are able to do good and to do well at the same time. The instruments that we use to do this vary. So you can do social impact bonds, which are pay-for-success securities where the return depends on achieving a social improvement. These have now grown into sustainability-linked bonds and loans of 1.4 trillion, Celia. Who would have thought a few years ago the social impact bond would lead to 1.4 trillion of pay-for-success securities? We also see, of course, green bonds, social bonds, and sustainability bonds with a fixed rate of interest, but with a set of objectives. And now we see the ability to measure impacts in a way which enables investors and government to look at companies differently. And for governments, this could mean providing incentives, as was suggested in New Zealand recently, tax credits for the companies delivering positive impacts, and for a carbon tax to be introduced for the companies that are polluting. It begins to change the way in which government moves to a fairer tax system that helps to improve our situation with regard to environmental and social gaps. The disappointment over the last 8 years is that governments haven't understood sufficiently quickly the importance of impact investment. You have trillions in financial markets, so the total impact investment market is today 2.5 trillion, roughly, of which half is sustainability-linked bonds and loans. But governments across the world have hardly experimented with this. Businesses break down into about 100 that understand this is the future, that they have to manage their impacts as well as their profits. They have to change their product portfolios to include less sugar. They have to change their operating policies in order to reduce emissions. They have to change their employment policies in order to create equal opportunity, improve diversity, do away with the payment below living wages and differences between ethnic and gender remuneration. This transparency that comes to business, because of the weight of investors who have understood the importance now in terms of their returns, not to invest in companies which may be liable to these new taxes, these are going to change the behavior of companies. And these are going to bring government to realize that this is a source of capital outside of their budgets that helps them achieve their priorities and pay when the objectives have been achieved. So to answer your question, what we've seen over the last 8 years is that investors, entrepreneurs, and consumers have really understood this the best. Corporates come next, and governments have been behind. But now, as we were saying, because of the effects on the financial system, their regulators are helping us to move forward.
Thank you. So now I'll do a little hard question, and then hard question because of the moment we are living globally. I've been in the social area for many years. You are 20 years in this area of impact investing. I'm 10 years. So we moved a lot, but sometimes I feel like we spend more time fighting those who are rolling in the opposite directions than actually paving the roads for what we see as a good vision. Referring to a Brazilian example, while we are having a generation, like you said, a new generation also of social entrepreneurs developing bioeconomy systems to keep the Amazon forest standing. The devastation of the forest in the recent years has been the worst in the past decade. Legal logging, mining, and growing fast, as well as well-financed. They are well-financed, setting the country back decades. So I would like you to see, in situations like this, inspiring these leaders that are participating in this group, how should leaders confront movements that run contrary to the change they intend to promote? How can you maintain your optimism when they will go against? Because we are seeing a good vision, and then we see countries or states going against ESG or impact investing. So how you do that, Sir Ronald or Ronnie?
I think the engine of this impact revolution is entrepreneurship and investment. And the transparency is the fulcrum on which the lever of entrepreneurship and investment really can exercise its full power, Célia. So we have to do everything we can now to encourage young entrepreneurs with impact business models, to encourage impact investors through reliable transparency, to exercise their full influence. The disruption is going to be huge. We've seen it in the automobile industry. It's been changed beyond recognition in the space of 2 decades since Tesla was founded. We're going to see it everywhere there is heavy pollution. We're going to see new technology come and help us to construct homes and offices in a way that is less polluting. We're going to find financial technology startups disrupting parts of the banking model, which charges the most to the most vulnerable because they're too weak to refuse to pay, but where the risk doesn't justify it. We're going to see it in education with models that enable students to pay for their education after they have received it and got into a job. We're going to see it everywhere, Célia. And so we have to be very clear. This is going to happen. It's inevitable now. It's inevitable now. The forces of entrepreneurship and consumers and investors cannot be stopped. Governments are not going to lead. Governments are going to play a helpful role along the way out of necessity. And eventually, they will get on the bandwagon because it will enable them to derive tax revenues in ways that enable them to achieve their priorities and to access capital markets, as you were saying, which have $200 to $300 trillion in them in order to achieve their goals. So forgive me, I have to go, but it's been a great pleasure, as always, to be here with you and all our participants from Brazil. Muito obrigado, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your inspiring lessons, and I do recommend participants to read your book, and then we continue this path together with a lot of change for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Célia.
Bye-bye.